Konnichiwa, good morning everyone, and welcome to the WA Dialogues here at the Women's Pavilion in collaboration with Cartier. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. My name is Charlotte Kahn, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you to moderate what will be undoubtedly a fascinating conversation. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. A reminder that simultaneous translation is available via Channel 1 for English and Channel 2 for Japanese. And we kindly ask you to remain seated throughout the session, as movement through the doors could be disruptive to our guests, but also to you in the audience. And to explore today's theme, Expanding Horizons, we are joined by three very distinguished guests. So please join me in welcoming Amanda Nguyen, Aarti Holla-Maini, and Mina Bernadoy. Welcome to all of you. So today's conversation celebrates everyone for their outstanding contribution to this world. And our three guests here, have certainly done that, and more, since they are making an impact even beyond our planet and redefining what's possible in space, in science, and importantly, also in society. Space has always stirred the human imagination. It's a symbol of our desire to explore, to understand, and to push beyond limits. But space exploration is also about life here on Earth, of course, and it's also about technological innovation and a reflection on our ethical responsibilities. So a proper introduction to our guests before we begin. Amanda Nguyen, you are an astronaut and civil rights leader. You are the founder of the RISE non-profit. More on that later, I'm sure. Mina Bernadoy, you are a space engineer at Mitsubishi Electric. Thank you for joining us. And Aarti Holla-Maini, you are director of UNOOSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. So I'd like to kickstart this conversation by finding out a bit more about your respective personal journeys. What drew you to the world of space? What triggered your interest? Was there a watershed moment, or was it maybe a slow build? I believe it was a slow build for you, Aarti, wasn't it? There was no real conviction to start with.
Absolutely. I actually had no intention of even making a career. I wanted to be a housewife when I was young. My dream was to live, I live now in Austria, but my dream was to live in one of these beautiful chalets in the Austrian Alps with flowers in the window and raise children and cook, and that was absolutely my dream. But somehow, I think in the desire to escape an arranged marriage, I pursued education. Education was my escape. After studying law with German law, strangely enough in Europe, I then went to do an MBA. And from the MBA, I was invited for an assessment center to a company called Daimler-Benz Aerospace, which today is part of the Airbus group. And after 3 days, I thought, wow, this is actually interesting. And they offered me a job. And as I had no real vision for where my life was going to be beyond wanting to be a housewife and a mother, I said yes. And so here we are, fast forward 25, 27 years, and here we are. So,
and you did become a mother.
I did become a mother. I have 3 boys. I have twins and another one. But I'm extremely grateful to have the opportunity that my career has given me.
Thank you. Amanda, what about your journey?
Do you have the chalet, though?
I don't have the chalet, no. Amanda. No, I don't.
Well, we should rent one and then live out that fantasy, because I also would like that. It is so wonderful to be here with everyone. My journey with space started from my parents. My mom was a boat refugee from Vietnam, and she learned celestial navigation in order to find her way to freedom. So that legacy is what inspired me to study astrophysics at Harvard and MIT. But unfortunately, I experienced gender-based violence. I worked at NASA, and in my career, while I was at Harvard, I was sexually assaulted. And I found out that the evidence from my case the United States routinely destroyed it. And I decided, after hearing from so many people who were like me as survivors, that their evidence also was being destroyed, that I would leave my astronaut dreams and become an activist. So I left NASA and rewrote the law. President Obama signed it in 2016. Then the world responded to that. It passed unanimously, and we worked on a United Nations resolution, which is similar, to give rights to survivors of sexual violence. That passed unanimously in 2022. And I wanted to, after working and seeing that the world can listen to our voices, I wanted to honor that one voice, the person I was before I was hurt, and her dreams of being an astronaut. So I applied to a research institute, got accepted to start my astronaut training. That was 4 years ago. And earlier this year, I became the first Vietnamese and Southeast Asian woman to fly to space.
Thank you so much. What we are hearing already is that it's not been a straightforward journey,
No.
for sure. And yet you managed to fulfill your dreams. What about you, Mina? Have you got, did you have a watershed moment? Did something happen that triggered your interest?
はい、私の場合はアマンダに似ていて、私が宇宙を目指すきっかけとなったのは11歳の時に東京駅を歩いていたら JAXA のブースがあって、月に行く探査機の名前を付けませんかというところがあって、でそこでかぐや姫、皆さんご存知の月に行ったかぐや姫を思い出して、かぐやって応募したらJAXA からバッジと証明書が、あなたが名付け親になりましたっていう証明書が送られてきて、でそれがきっかけで、私も宇宙に行きたい、アマンダみたいに宇宙に行きたいと思って、そこからずっと宇宙を目指してきて、今は宇宙開発をして、自分の作った人工衛星が宇宙に実際に行ったりとか、今も衛星を観測していたりとか、ずっと宇宙に関わってます。
Thank you very much. And you will have noticed already that we are joined by individuals who have sometimes a tortuous journey behind them, of course, but one of real progress and overcoming the odds. And what's also interesting about the three of you is the fact that you have a very multicultural background. Indeed, Vietnamese parents. Mina, I think I'm allowed to say it, you got married recently to a French man and you lived in France for a while. Aarti, British-born, lived all over Europe, married to a Dutch man. I'd like to know how much that's shaped your personal journey. And if you can tell us a bit more maybe about the obstacles. I mean, you've already mentioned some, of course, but the main obstacles you have encountered to develop your career in space and in STEM in the world of science. Amanda, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. I think for so many of us, I want people to know that no matter who you are and where you come from, your dreams matter. 50 years ago, the Vietnam War ended. And when my parents looked at the sky, they saw death because they saw bombs. But this year, when they looked at the sky, they saw the first Vietnamese woman in space. My mom came from a rural village in Vietnam, and the distance in one generation is that back then, her family, she's one out of 12 kids, none of them would have imagined that their family member could pass the Kármán line. And so I think that our lives are dictated by the choices that we make. We may not be able to control the cards we are dealt, but we all have the ability to rise above our challenges. And I want people to know that no matter what challenges have been pushed on them, they can make it through.
Thank you. What we are hearing here is the fact that we think the main challenge is technical. We think it's scientific. But the main challenge, it seems, is to overcome your family, psychological, or maybe societal hurdles. Can you relate to that, maybe, Aarti?
Definitely. I think for me, my biggest obstacle was myself. I think I've always suffered, I know people won't believe it, but I've always suffered from great insecurities. I can't do maths. I'm sure you're amazing at maths. I can't do maths, and for me this is being raised in an Indian household where STEM is, you know, the holy grail, and languages are you know, just a soft something which doesn't matter. But languages for me was an insight into different worlds. It was understanding people. It was honing interpersonal skills. And it took a very long time for me to realize that the skills that I had really mattered and that they could actually drive change. Because your ability to engage and communicate with others and connect with other people, because you have some kind of sense of their backgrounds, their cultures, and you can see why you may be misunderstanding each other, because you come from a very different place, yeah? So I think I've gone off into the clouds with what I'm trying to say, but it took me a very long time to appreciate that soft skills are equally important as STEM education, and therefore to start valuing myself and believing in myself. So maybe there's some people who can relate to that, I don't know.
I'm sure everyone in the audience can relate to that, the fact that you do create your own limits often in life. Mina, is that something you have experienced as well? What was your greatest challenge or hurdle to become the princess?
はい、私の場合はもう2人のお話とちょっと関連しているところがあるんですけど、まずアマンダさんの時はその両親から結構インスパイアされて、でもっと頑張ろうと思ったっていうお話があったと思うんですけど、私の場合も両親がよくプラネタリウムとかに連れて行ってくれたのもあって、宇宙っていうものにすごい身近に感じていたんですね。ただそこで私の家族誰も理系がいなかったんですよ。みんなビジネスとか不動産とかそういうのしかやっていなかったので、周りに同じようにエンジニアだったり研究者がいない中でどうやってキャリアを築いていくのかっていうのは結構困ったんですけど、そういう場合はもう本とかオンラインとかで見つけて、でそこからいつの間にか自分自身が後輩とかもできて、いろんな人にアドバイスを求められるようになったりしました。であとはそのソフトスキルの話があったと思うんですけど、私の場合も高校の時にアメリカに留学をして一言も英語喋れなかったんですけど、ただその時も私はアメリカに来た理由が宇宙飛行士になりたくて、英語がでそれには宇宙ステーションにいるには英語が喋れなきゃいけないんだって言ってたら、知り合いのお父さんが NASA で働いていて、ワシントン DC のでそこでNASA に連れてってくれて、宇宙のエンジニアってこういう仕事があるんだっていうのを知れたので、そこから具体的に周りにエンジニアいなかったんですけど、私もこうなりたいなっていう憧れがその15歳の時にできました。で私はそこから英語によってそのアメリカの宇宙の文化にすごい触れたんですけど、数年前に JAXA を働いていて辞めた後にフランスの方でも働いてたんですけど、そこでフランスのまた宇宙開発っていうまた別の全然アメリカとは違うものを学んで、やっぱアーティさんが言ってたみたいに言語によって全然文化だったり開発の仕方だったりも違うんだなっていうのを感じました。
ありがとうございます。I just wanted to spend a moment to thank you for your openness and honesty in starting this conversation with very personal stories, and for very powerful ladies to talk about their very deep feelings is something very impactful indeed. So thank you very much for that, and for sharing the message as well, Aarti, that it takes hard and soft skills to make a career for yourself in space. So let's move on to the rest of our conversation about how we can empower everyone to fulfill their dreams like you have. And Amanda, I wanted to ask you about your recent spaceflight experience aboard Blue Origin. We've all heard about it, of course. Here's a picture behind us. Can you tell us what went through your mind as you look right back down to Earth?
Stress. I had so many experiments and a speech, and then I had to look at Earth. I actually inverted myself because that was what other astronauts had said for us to do. And so it was a lot to do within the time frame that I had. And then I also had to report on the status of my crew mates. But the truth is that, of course, perhaps people are familiar with the overview effect. It's an experience that's documented in psychiatric literature that many astronauts experience, which is a feeling of awe in its full definition, which is both wonder and terror, right? This idea that when you are able to have an orbital perspective, see Earth from the outside, what you're gazing on is a pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan put it. Everyone, everything that has ever lived or died is on this. And most astronauts are technical people. We leave Earth as scientists and engineers, but we return to Earth as activists, as humanitarians, because we don't see these borders in space. What we see is the fragility of Earth, and we want to protect it. Especially the Apollo astronauts, the humans that have seen Earth from the farthest vantage point, have had some very colorful quotes about the meaning of the overview effect. And in a sense, I did experience that. It was awe-inspiring. There actually really is no other feeling that can replicate it. But it's a feeling that I've also, in part, already known, which is empathy for one another, the ability for us to be in touch with our humanity.
And that's a very powerful message indeed. I just wanted to follow up on the word you mentioned at the start of your answer here. It's stress. Stress because you were on a mission, of course, but you also had a lot of responsibility as an ambassador and an advocate and an activist.
Yes. I had two surprising emotions. I was stressed, but if you look at the pictures from my launch, I have on me this sports band that detailed to the seconds what time I had allotted for each experiment. And that's something you just cannot train for on Earth, which is how microgravity, sustained microgravity, will feel like. You can do zero-G parabolas, which are jets, and each microgravity moment is maybe like 15 to 20 seconds. But because we don't have that ability to just recreate, other than a neutral buoyancy lab, which is a pool, a big pool, one of my experiments doubled in time because the two Petri dishes just shot off in different directions. And so I did have to make up time for that, which meant less time looking out of the window. So that was something that was unaccounted for, but I did prepare for. The other part that really surprised me was that I had perhaps the opposite of imposter syndrome. Sitting on that rocket as we were blasting off, and between ascent and descent, I realized this is easier than I had imagined. I had done high G-force training in jets before, so I know what it feels like to pull 5-6 Gs, but in the rocket, because of the way that it is, or in the space capsule, because of the way that the seats are aligned, it was very manageable, and I realized, I do love this, and I really was made to be an astronaut.
A sense of recognition. That sounds absolutely awesome indeed.
Perhaps I will say that so the shorter you are, the more likely you are to do well in high G-force testing, because the taller you are, the quicker the blood drains out of your brain and you will faint. So
it's not for me.
Sorry, but for us short queens, it works very well. You are meant for astronaut training.
Thank you very much for that.
Can I jump in for a second?
Please do.
What you said about when you realize that this is meant for you really resonates for me. when I arrived in the United Nations, which was just a year and a half ago. I'm from the space industry, so the public sector is quite different. But when I work in between the Chinese, the Russians, the US, the Indians, all these different nationalities trying to bring consensus around an issue, when you succeed in doing that because of the skills that you have, whether it's linguistic, whether it's just charm, whether it's they find a way to relate to you because they like you or they respect you for whatever reason, that's when you realize I'm doing what I'm meant to do. You know? And whether it's hard, whether it's easy, there's nothing more fulfilling than realizing you're doing what you're meant to do, because you're fulfilling, you're achieving something which needs to happen, yeah?
And once again, what you're doing here is to reiterate the message that every skill, every type of personality, everyone is valuable to space exploration. I think that's a very valid point. And you mentioned charm. Well, isn't charm the ability to work with other people, to give them a good experience? That's also important to bring a project to fruition. But I just wanted to maybe go back to how we can change and influence the systems that will allow everyone to get into the space sector. Because Aarti, UNOOSA reported recently about maybe the barriers or what could enable more people to join the space sector. And I'd like you to maybe share the highlights of this report with us, please.
Sure. So we have a program called Space for Women, which is how to promote women in the space sector. I want to just add my a personal thought on that. You know, when I came to the UN and I learned that, oh, we have a Space for Women program, it sounded very much like a first world problem, which I struggle with, because, you come to the UN and you think it's about maintaining peace, feeding the world, education for all, healthcare for all, grassroots problems. And so I insisted that if I'm going to connect with this program that we have, I want the next expert meeting to be in Africa or in a developing country somewhere, so that we bring an audience also from that community and we engage them in this conversation. I'm not going to work on a first world problem when there's so many bigger problems in the world than how many women are in leadership. Sorry. Yeah. However, we have done extremely valuable studies. Very interesting insights have come from them. And, it was, the first study we did was on the number of women in the Korean space sector. So this was funded by Korea. They cared about it a lot, and they worked with us, and after the work that we did with them and the expert meeting we held in Korea, they tripled the number of women in their space sector, which is a great thing. And then they said, if this has worked for us, maybe it'll make a difference if we do it globally. So we're working with us, we did a global study, and we found that less than 30% of the workforce in the space sector is actually women. And of course, the number goes down when you look at leadership positions. It's 21% in leadership positions. Surprisingly, the study, when it broke it down into region, saw that Africa had the largest percentage of women in leadership positions in the space sector, 47%. Yeah. There's numerous space agencies which have been born in different African countries over the last 10 years. And they promote women vigorously, and it's a great thing. What we have, some of the takeaways, I'm sorry, I have to look at my notes, is that those countries or those regions who are closer to 50% is because they have targets for women representation. They are twice as likely to have quotas, that every board needs to have at least X% women, or in 1 year we need to have X% women recruited into our companies. They have continuous monitoring and measuring of how are we doing. They keep looking at their improvements, and they also put money into this, so they invest in supporting women. And I think the big takeaway is to be successful in this, you need to have both a long-term vision and strategy, which means targets, deadlines, and so on. That's when you have high impact. But you also need to do lower impact, short-term initiatives like training and events, celebrating International Women's Day every day, so that you're working on the culture of your community, of your company. You're sensitizing them, you're opening their eyes to things which they may never otherwise have thought about. So short-term wins and a long-term strategy.
Thank you very much. Very valuable insights and pointers here to change how things are working currently. Mina, I'd like to hear your perspective now as a space engineer. What do you think should happen maybe a little bit earlier, or from the early stage of space endeavor exploration at school and education? What do you think should happen in schools or in workplaces, of course, as well, for everyone to enter the field and to grow there?
はい、今の質問からアーティさんがやっているスペース・フォー・ウーマンのプログラム、実は私もメンターとして2年ほど参加してました。でその時に、マレーシアとオーストラリアとロシアの高校生、大学生、大学院生それぞれにアドバイスを、スペースエンジニアになるためにはどうしたらいいのっていうアドバイスを聞かれて、でそれぞれに対して月に1回メンタリングをした時に、それぞれみんなステージが違うのでアドバイス違うんですけど、高校生とかに対してはまずもう宇宙って言ってもエンジニア以外にもスペースローとか宇宙法とかたくさんあるよっていうのも言って、そしたらあ、そうなんだってことで、まずは皆さん実は宇宙って遠いものだと思ってるかもしれないんですけど、地球で必要なもの全部宇宙で必要になるんですよ。だから多分髪を切る人とかも必要になると思いますし、農業とかも必要になると思うので、宇宙って大変だって思うよりは地球の延長だっていうふうに身近なものだって思ってもらったらいいんじゃないかなと。でそこは私も結局エンジニアになるために学んだことって最初椅子の作り方とかなんですよ。工学部として。で椅子ってどうやってできてるんだろうってところからその勉強が宇宙機器の開発につながっていったので、まずは本当に地球上のことを知ってから宇宙に行ったらいいんじゃないかなと思います。
And Mina, what about the role of mentorship here to help you grow? Because Amanda, you've talked about your parents, for instance, who clearly were an inspiration. Was there anyone during your journey that provided the help and support you needed to grow as a space engineer?
はい、私の場合は自分のライフステージごとにメンターみたいな存在がどんどん変わっていったんですけど、例えば大学の教授とかも私のある意味サポートメンターだったり、あとはなかなか本当この2人みたいになかなか話せないんですけど、本で読んだりとかしていて、で山崎直子さんとかに憧れて、で実際に自分で勉強していったら1対1でお話できたりもして、でそんな感じで山崎直子さんっていうのは日本の宇宙飛行士の女性の方なんですけど、そういう方のイベントに会いに行ったりしていくうちにどんどん自分がここに行きたいっていう明確な目標としてロールモデルを作っていって、でその自分のステージごとにどんどん変わっていくんですけど、なので私にとって結構こちらの2人も憧れの存在みたいな感じです。はい。
Thank you. That's very helpful indeed. You will remember that in my introduction I mentioned that space exploration is also important for life on Earth. So we're going to move on to this conversation now, okay? What you're learning in space that can be applied here to change our lives for the best. And Mina, I'm turning to you again here to find out how space-based technology can help us better understand our planet and Earth systems and maybe better respond to disasters and climate risks here on the ground.
はい。私が JAXA で働いていた時に地球観測の衛星 の、担当をしていたんですね、そのプロジェクトの担当で。そこで例えば日本で津波が起こった時とか地震が起こった時ってすぐにその衛星が観測をして、ここの地域が被害を受けているんだよとかすぐ知らせてくれて、その結果私たちがこう現地に実際に行ったりして救助に入れたり、ここが危険になるから避難してねっていう案内が出たりするので、実は宇宙開発だったり人工衛星の技術によって私たち、特に災害の多い国なので助かっているっていう部分があります。
Thank you very much. Very topical for a country like Japan, of course. Amanda, you mentioned earlier that during your space flight, you conducted health experiments. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and I also wanted to recognize, Aarti, what you had said, which is putting a spotlight onto communities that may not have access to resources to access space. That was so important for me. So 2 of my experiments were intentionally in partnership with the Vietnamese National Space Center and the Philippine Space Agency. For that reason, I wanted to take the narrative spotlight, but also the resources, and highlight the talent that exists in these communities, because the talent is there. It's just a matter of exposure and also funding that is able to make their ideas become reality. So the 2 bioastronautics research that I did was on women's health. The first one is on breast cancer. I flew a piezoelectric ultrasound, and that was in partnership with MIT, so my former lab. The ultrasound detects in a way that can be before and after mammograms, whether or not there is a tumor growing. And it is not only for breast cancer, it can be applied to any part of the spacesuit. But the application that the scientists are working on at MIT is for it to be embedded into bras so that it could help save up to 12 million lives a year for breast cancer. This specific research is important because space gives us something that cannot be replicated on Earth, which is more time. So in the recent Axiom flight, one of the experiments that they did was look at cancer cells in microgravity. Because these cancer cells are not inhibited by gravity or by other tissue structures, some of them grew at 10 times the rate, or rather, some cells grew fast as what we've seen in 10 years on Earth as 10 days in space. So because this gives us more time to research the exponential growth of these cells, it can give us the ability equally to test different strategies to mitigate that cancer. So that's one experiment that I did. The other experiment that I did is on menstruation. So specifically, my area of research is on wound dressing. I flew on the first all-female crew in history, and that was a coincidence that my research was also women's health. It was actually because I studied women's health research that I was chosen to be on this flight. And in particular, why I wanted to conduct it is because NASA, in the early stages, used menstruation as a reason to prevent women from being astronaut candidates. They didn't actually have data to back up their reasoning, and so I tested different materials and see how their fluid absorption was in microgravity. And the third experiment that I did was on plant pathology. So that one, I flew these special, they're called fast plants, and saw how they responded to both ascent, the G-forces, and the flight trajectory profile. And the application for that on Earth is for food security, because these plants grow very fast. And so in space, they can be farmed for astronauts to eat, and then on Earth, it can be used for places that are experiencing food insecurity.
Well, no wonder why you were stressed, because you had
So
minutes.
much. Yeah,
you had
and then I had a
minutes to
speech
conduct the experiments. That's impressive indeed. We'll talk about data a little bit later on, because that's very important indeed, collecting data, but sharing data as well. That's something we'll mention with you, Aarti. But before we do, I just wanted to find out more about how UNOOSA is working to align space research with the SDGs, you know, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, in order to create a better planet for everyone and a better environment where everyone can thrive, of course. So how are you working with them to align your work with the SDGs more closely, especially, like you mentioned already, in low and middle income countries?
Sure, thank you so much. Maybe this is an opportunity to actually say what UNOOSA is, because most people in the world haven't heard of the United Nations' best kept secret, which is that it has an office for outer space affairs. It is our job to promote and work on maintaining the peaceful use of outer space, but also to democratize space and make sure that space remains a province for all humankind. One of the first things that the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space did, which is where all the member states come together, is adopt the Outer Space Treaty. And that the fundamental principle of the Outer Space Treaty is that space is the province of all mankind, humankind. So that treaty is still cited by multiple member states, from the largest to the smallest, in the committee today. They cite it again and again and again. And of course, the developing countries, the global south, keep reminding people that you're not doing this just for you. You're doing it for all of us. When Neil Armstrong landed in the moon, he didn't do it for himself or for America. He was an ambassador for all of us. Yeah. So this is really the fundamental principle that anchors the work of our office, and we have many examples of how we execute it, how we implement it today. First of all, we have an Access to Space for All program. It was started actually in partnership with JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, and through their KiboCube module, which is a module on the International Space Station, we run a competition for teams from developing countries to test, fly payloads, fly little satellites, launch a satellite, conduct an experiment or something like that on the ISS. Meanwhile, it's not just with JAXA that we have this program. We have it with ExoLaunch, it's a company in Germany. We have it with MBRSC, it's a UAE-based space organization. Many different organizations are supporting this. We allow teams to conduct experiments, like Amanda was saying, in microgravity and hypergravity. And the winners are always teams from developing countries. And recently, we also had an all-woman team from Nepal, from a university in Nepal. So that's a really important program that we have, and it has far-reaching consequences. It's not a one-off that, oh, this little team of kids has conducted an experiment. In Kenya launched its very first satellite with us. It led to the creation of their space agency. When they launched their satellite, by working with us, they understood that they are now a spacefaring nation which has obligations. They registered their satellite with UNOOSA. They then started to work on their own second satellite by themselves without a competition. And they launched an entire STEM program. So through working with our office, it kick-started a space economy in a country where previously there was none. Yeah? I just want to mention one more, if I can. We're talking about Kenya. There is a satellite operator in the UK called Avanti Space. And more than 10 years ago, they had a little bit of funding from the UK Development Agency to run a pilot program. And it was for educating marginalized girls. Meanwhile, that program it's no longer funded by the government. It's now a corporate social responsibility activity of the company. They do it for free. And they have connected 250 50 schools, isolated schools which have no internet connectivity. But by putting a satellite dish on the roof of the school, they are enabling a direct connection to the internet backbone. These children have access to 1 hour per week of a maths quiz. It's called Maths Whiz. And they measured that after 1 year of allowing each child just 1 hour access per week, the learning age increased by 1.5 years. And these are children which, unlike our children, are not playing games. They don't have access to internet and all these gadgets and so on like we do. So this is the transformational power of what space technologies, applications and solutions can do here on Earth.
And a few words maybe about data sharing. I was alluding to it earlier because obviously UNOOSA is a great example of international collaboration, and it's very important at a time of much discord internationally, of course. But data sharing is essential in order to help address local environmental and sustainability challenges.
Yeah, so we have heard, many of you will have heard of the digital divide, the fact that many of us are online, half of the world is not online. There's also a massive data divide. We've been taking photographs of the Earth from space for the last 6 decades. And as technology has advanced, just like 10 years ago, we used to have the Nokia phones, well, maybe longer than 10 years ago, maybe we don't realize how old we are now. 20 years ago, we had these basic phones, and now we have, you know, amazing phones which can take very high resolution photographs. It's the same for the cameras that we send into space. And because we have 60 years of archived imagery, we can see what has changed. We would not know that there was a climate crisis on Earth unless we had seen it from space. And because we can see it from space, we can monitor and measure changes. We can see how lakes are drying up, shrinking, and even evaporating. The Aral Sea is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Glaciers and so on have shrunk. But these are macro problems, things which you can see in large scale. But data is very important to enable local governments, local authorities, local communities to take action, so empowering people at the local level. Recently we had high resolution imagery from companies like Airbus and Maxar, and we partnered with a Japanese company called Space Data Inc., who made a digital twin of the island of Tonga for us. Why? The small island developing states are suffering from lots of flooding and the consequences of climate change and increasing sea level rise. So with a digital twin, they can simulate the effects of sea level rise, which allows them to plan and prepare. Where do we build houses in the future? Where do we need to evacuate first? And so on.
Thank you very much. Mina, as a space engineer, constantly working on pushing the boundaries of innovation, do you think that generally we, as the general public, know enough about all the great achievements you are and all the things you're learning actually by conducting experiments and the impact it can have on Earth?
そうですね、私はもう常に専門家の人と一緒に仕事をしているので、現在の皆さんがどれくらい宇宙開発に興味を持っているかっていうのがわからないんですけど、つい最近もう今月かなに日本のスタートアップが月に着陸しようとしたのは皆さん知ってます？ニュース見ましたか？実はギリギリのところで着地に失敗してしまったんですけど、ご存知ですね。ですけど、でもこのスタートアップで月に着陸に挑戦するっていうのは本当かなりチャレンジングなことで、実は私が大学時代の研究室の延長のスタートアップなんで、すごい皆さん知っている人たちなんですけど、もうずっと見守ってて、これ2回目のチャレンジだったんですね。ですけどこうやって日本の宇宙開発もどんどん進んでいってるんだよっていうのがニュースで見かけてくれてたら嬉しいですし、実は宇宙はもうどんどん国から民間にも移っていってるので、もっと耳にする機会とかあるんじゃないかなと。インターネットも今アーティさんちょっと言ってましたけど、聞いたことあると思いますけど、スターリンクとかで自分の携帯とつながったりとかもしてるので、皆さんの生活にすごい宇宙開発もこれからもどんどん入ってくると思います。はい。
Thank you very much. I think we've all learned here how much space exploration can contribute to our better understanding of systems here on Earth. And that's fascinating. And we're here at the World Dialogues to share stories, aren't we? And maybe that's something that we've missed, actually. More storytelling about space and how it can change things. Amanda, you're a brilliant storyteller. Do you think we're doing enough?
Well, you know, STEM people are famously great communicators. Actually, they aren't, which is why
You're being ironic.
science, yes, which is why science communication is so important. One of my jobs at NASA was to convince Congress to give us more money for our budget. And the strongest case for that is spin-offs, space technology. So for instance, cell phones were invented, because during the, I want to say, second crewed mission, the capsule during landing broke off from mission control, and mission control said, we need a self-contained radio system. And that's part of what created cell phones. Another spin-off is sunglasses. The same kind of UV protection that is on it is the ones that are used in the visors for the extravehicle activity EVA spacewalk suits. Plasma TV screens, your tennis shoes. There are so many spin-offs because, what is the quote? Necessity is the mother of invention. But to your point, you know, the technology that we have in our latest iPhones is now more advanced than the technology that was used to send humans to the moon. And that gap still persists. But I think that space absolutely has captured our imagination in a way that I haven't seen just equalized by another. You know, when I walk around Expo, one of the most common questions I reflect on is, if I was in charge of America or my country's pavilion, what would I put in it? And in the United States pavilion, it's all space. So I understand that Expo is about technology and science. Of course, you know, that is what's being featured. But regardless, you know, space allows us to not only test the boundaries of what innovation can be in engineering, obviously in science, for us, our understanding of our place in the universe when we talk about exoplanets or astrophysics, but it also asks us to question, again, our place in the universe and what are we going to do about it. I think both science and activism answers that question.
Thank you very much. So we have discussed how space exploration and innovation can help contribute to make this planet a better place. But there are ethical considerations too, because sadly we are also not treating space or the space just around our planet with the consideration it deserves. And Aarti, I know you've done a lot around the issue of space debris. That's all the debris orbiting around the Earth with all the satellite parts and whatever is floating around us. Can you tell us more about the issue, the challenge it represents, and what we should do to do space exploration better?
Sure. So part of maintaining space for peaceful uses is also ensuring that it remains safe and sustainable. Amanda, I don't know whether while you were on board you had any space debris worries.
No, that would have been terrifying.
Yeah. So many astronauts, I mean, do experience this when they're on the ISS. They have to go into a specific part of the space station because there is a warning that a piece of debris might be coming towards the space station and so on. So it can be very real. But it's not just about human life. It's very much about human life, but it's very much also about making sure that we can continue to rely on all of the services and solutions that come from space. we can't move from A to B anymore without using our phones. We rely on GPS systems, on satellite navigation systems. They have become embedded in our society. When I was young, every morning I would switch on the TV to see what's the weather forecast today. And what would you see? You'd see images from space of clouds and so on. Yeah, so you have Earth observation looking down, and you have communication. So all of these things come from satellites in orbit, and we can't control how many satellites are being launched up. But what we can do is make sure that they coordinate better to avoid collisions. So one of the important parts of the work of the committee is to facilitate what we call space traffic coordination. It's not the same as when you have planes in the sky or cars in the road. There's no traffic lights in space. Yeah, so nobody is going to stop at a junction. These things are flying around at an unbelievable speed that we can hardly imagine. So if they hit each other, it's catastrophic. There are pieces of debris in space which might only be, 1 centimeter big. That can take out an entire satellite. Japan, we're here in Japan, so let me showcase a Japanese company called Astroscale. Astroscale is perhaps the leading company in the world which has demonstrated its ability to go into space and look at a moving object. Imagine these things are flying so fast. How is it possible that you can send another object to move at the same speed, to actually go around it, to observe it, with a view to catching onto it, to maybe bring it down, because it's a satellite which is not working anymore. So it's just a piece of junk, essentially, flying around the Earth, yeah? And if something is not working, then it's dangerous. So we need more investment into this sector. We need many more companies and countries and space agencies to do more technology development. Unfortunately, this is a problem which we will never be able to clean up space. Yeah? It is not like the environment, which heals. Like we saw during COVID, when industrial activity went down, when driving went down, flights went down, the environment was healing. Space is not like that. The junk which is up there, we will never be able to scale fast enough, big enough in order to clean it up. Therefore, safety is really of paramount importance. And these are important pieces of work of the committee.
Thank you very much for that, Aarti. That's very helpful to understand. We are sadly running out of time for all the questions I have for our very distinguished speakers here. Many more questions around how space exploration is changing life here for us. So to conclude, I'd like to give you the opportunity to address different questions and pick the one you prefer. Maybe share a message with our audience here, a message to young generations who are inspired by space and would like to have a career in the space sector, or maybe share something you have learned from your time in space, or what space exploration has taught you about life generally or life on Earth. Amanda.
I got the news that I was assigned to my mission December of 2024. And in November 2024, I remember feeling so dejected because I had thought I had no routes to space. And it's because I really didn't know that there were decision makers who were closely observing me. And so what I want folks to know is that if you want to be an astronaut or whatever it is that you dream of doing, even if you think that there are no pathways, the more that you put yourself out there and declare that that is what you want to do, the more opportunities will come your way. There is a mountain that all people who have succeeded in their goals have climbed. I call it Cringe Mountain, which is that for somebody who hasn't made it yet, they can say, this is my dream, I am going to go fight for my dream, and other people might look and make fun of them and be like, that's crazy, you're never gonna get there, no one like you has ever been there. Everyone, from astronauts to Lady Gaga, all of them have climbed Cringe Mountain. But no one who has succeeded will ever criticize you for trying. It is only those who are smaller than you who are trying to pull you down. So if you have that big dream, just know that if you feel cringy, that's because it's the forces of society on you that you feel that pressure of stepping out of line, of being excellent, of going for it. And just know that if you put yourself in proximity to what it is that you're trying to achieve, you're closer than you think you are.
Thank you very much for that. So listen to that internal voice, that compass. It's guiding you to the right place, sending you in the right direction. Thank you so much for that. Mina.
はい、私からの最後に皆さんへのメッセージとしては、みんな宇宙宇宙って言ってますけど、実は皆さんもすでに今宇宙にいるってことを覚えておいてほしくて、例えば朝眩しいのも太陽が昇ってくるように見えるのも地球が回っているからですし、あとは私が大学時代の専門で熱設計、人工衛星の熱設計を学んでいた時に、太陽からの地球の距離がちょっと近いかちょっと遠いだけで、私たち今暑い暑い言ってますけど、生きれる温度じゃないですか。太陽近づきすぎるともう暑すぎてもう人も生物もいませんし、遠すぎると今度寒すぎるので、皆さんも実はこう季節とか朝とか夜を感じながら宇宙の中にいるんだっていうことを意識してもらうと日々楽しいかもしれないです。はい。
Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。Aarti.
You know, the world of the United Nations and countries and politics and geopolitics is a very divided one. And I have traveled a lot more to new places than I ever did before in my life since I took this job. I went from the US to China to Japan to Singapore to different places. And I realized in a way that I had never realized before how misunderstanding contributes so hugely to division and war. And it's really misunderstanding. In the US, people are in the Western world, people are very open and flamboyant, and you know, we have a very open way of speaking. When we come to the Asia-Pacific region, people are a lot more discreet. They're a lot more quiet, introspective even. It is very easy to say, you're not transparent. And that's an accusation which is not necessarily justified. When you engage with people, you must try to speak their language, even if you don't speak their language. And this is a massive lesson learned for me, which informs how I behave and how I think and how I will behave as a mediator going forward. And the biggest lesson, personal takeaway for me from this is be yourself and don't be scared to be yourself. However, be conscious that other people don't come from where you come from. Therefore, they will misunderstand you. Yeah? So if they're going to misunderstand, don't blame them. Try to help them understand, but be yourself.
I think the key takeaway here from our theme, Expanding Horizons, is the fact that we should be doing what we're doing here a bit more. Dialogue, talk, share stories with everyone, and make space exploration a great dream for everyone and empower them to grab it. Thank you so much for what's been a truly inspiring conversation. I have learned a lot here today, including that mobile phones were obviously devised to help space communications. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that anecdote. Many thanks to our wonderful guests for their contributions here today. Many thanks to you for your attention. It's great to see so many of you engaging in the conversation. Thank you. And hopefully today's conversation will leave you energized and motivated to also push boundaries in your private lives and professional lives too. So I wish you the very best in your endeavors. And a reminder, before you go, to all of you that you can get fast-track access to the exhibition downstairs, and you may return later today with your wristband should you wish to do so. And if you'd like to share your thoughts with us, we have a QR code that you can scan, so you can share your impressions and whatever you have thought of our session today with us. We'd like to encourage you to do so. And I wish you a fantastic day. Once again, please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers here today on stage. Many thanks to all of you.